Laissez-faire means the government should be hands-off. The Supreme Court wanted to leave business alone so business could treat its workers any old way, pay its workers any old wage. That businesses were protected from regulation, from unions, the antitrust legislation, and from taxation. Using the 14th Amendment, the Supreme Court said that a corporation is a person. A few days ago I read, well, if a corporation is a person, how do you hang a corporation when it commits some kind of a crime? Anyway, never mind. Officially, a corporation is considered a person, and as a corporation has all the rights that a person does, basically to do as it pleases. Now, the income tax. I must elaborate on that a little bit. The income tax was passed around the 1880s. Some people took it to court, and the Supreme Court declared the income tax was unconstitutional. It took 20 years, but Congress got to work on it. 2/3 of both houses, I mean, the president is not involved in the amendment, but 2/3 of both houses voted to make it constitutional. Then 3/4 of the states voted to make it constitutional. This was the last time, folks, that a Supreme Court decision was overturned by an amendment. And that has been, the 16th Amendment had to do with income tax. It was passed around 1912. That means for the last 107 years or so, no decision made by the Supreme Court has been overturned by an act of Congress or by an act of the states. The Supreme Court can vote 5-4 and their decision is the law. If there were true checks and balances, their decisions should be overturned at least 2 or 3 times a year. Their decisions cannot be. Now, some of their bad decisions have been overturned. They had a decision in 1896 that said the southern states could put separate but equal facilities, separate schools for whites and blacks, separate toilets. The problem was they were never equal, but they were separate. I mean, you can't deny that. That decision was overturned in 1954. 58 years it took to overturn, but about 58 years later, a new court, not one member who had sat on the 1896 court was still around. But it's rare that the Supreme Court will overturn its own decisions. But they did, and when it does, it takes generations. People in the Gilded Age talked about politics a lot. Baseball was not their pastime. Politics was. Republicans and Democrats would both sides waved the bloody shirt. In the South, the Democrats said, "We fought for you, we fought for your rights." In the North, "We fought to end slavery. Look how good we are," and waved the bloody shirt. I'm speaking figuratively, of course. Protestants would flock to the Republican Party and get laws passed that would require businesses to close on Sunday. These laws were eventually called blue laws. Today, very few businesses close on Sundays, and the ones that do so voluntarily. Chick-fil-A closes on Sundays, and believe it or not, they prosper. Most restaurants would commit suicide by closing on Sundays. Chick-fil-A does it and do well. Again, it's because of the type of customers they have. Democrats, Southern Democrats and Jews said that Republicans often undermined their culture, and this meant that immigrants eventually turned to Democrats, and given enough time, a lot of blacks began to turn to Democrats also, not wanting things like blue laws passed or laws that favored morality. I want to say this, folk, in the Bible, neither Jesus nor his disciples ever went to a government official and asked the government official to pass laws favoring their morality. Never did. If you want people to change, you change their hearts, not change the laws. And if any of you want to comment, your comments are welcome. For 70 years, the Democrats always carried the South. Even though some local elections, a few Republicans would win here and there, but for the most part, even my 1968 government book said there's only one party in the South. In 1968, that was the year I started as I started out as a second semester sophomore and then in my junior year of college. And in my junior year, I took government. And there was only one party in the South, that was the Democrats. The South began industrializing somewhat, particularly places like New England offered cheap labor. Now, you might can tell I'm a Northerner. When I was 18, one of my pastors advised me, don't go south, they don't pay much. Maybe they didn't pay much, but at least there was work to find. And again, go north, go to Ohio, and you'll see a whole lot of dilapidated looking factories, dilapidated looking railroad yards, crumbling roads, not everywhere, but in a lot of places. Places that are crumbling, decaying. While the south, you see a lot of nice smooth roads. Again, not everywhere. But most of the time, you can find a job if you're willing to work at what you can find. Persons who can't find work at SALT because they're only determined, I'm only going to work at a certain job. Of my 3 children, 2 of them work in food services, and they've been able to find jobs easily. The other one will not work in food services, and that one's having a hard time finding work. If you're willing to work, where they'll hire you. And every restaurant you go to, or practically everyone, almost everywhere I go into, they're begging for help. Any of you who go to a restaurant might know what I'm talking about. They beg for help. The railroads, a lot of railroads were built in the South after the war. The railroads that General Sherman destroyed were quickly repaired and built better than they had been before. And by the way, they started building them all with the same size of track. At one time, every railroad company had its own size of track, and a train from one company could not ride on a train from another. But today, every railroad you see, except for the toy railroads you see in amusement parks or whatever, but the track size is standard. This is true in all of the Americas. Now, India at one time, I understand, had a wider track than the rest of us. I do not know if India standardized their tracks or not. Tobacco, the South dominated the tobacco industry. Now, as a kid, I saw tobacco grown in southern Pennsylvania, but it did not grow as well as it does in the more sunny climates of Virginia and Georgia. Again, I want to remind you, tobacco is a highly addictive substance, and a lot of persons whom it grabs will never let go of it. And it's also expensive, so I'm not in any way pushing it. A lot of the South remained rural. Women confined to the home, and they were expected to, the men were expected to be in charge of their families. A lot of whites feared that making black men equal would lead to a mixing of the races, and a lot of whites then joined the Democratic Party, and the Democrats were against mixing the races. The whites resisted the incursion of blacks by lynching, that is, killing blacks who disagreed with them, and as I've already mentioned, the Ku Klux Klan was often guilty of doing a lot of the lynching. Ida Wells struck back at the lynching. She was a black woman herself. Anti-lynching laws came up in Congress several times, but the votes of the Southern Democrats always defeated the anti-lynching laws. Now, we're going to later learn that during the administration of Franklin Roosevelt needed the votes of Southern Democrats in order to stay elected. So Franklin Roosevelt did not push for anti-lynching legislation, but his wife did. His wife worked hard to get anti-lynching legislation. Today, there is anti-lynching legislation on the book, and you don't hear as much about it as you once did, even though occasionally an old case of lynching will be brought up, and sometimes here and there the new ones. Women took up causes like temperance, that means no drinking alcohol, and suffrage, the right to vote. 2 women, and Susan B. Anthony, her picture is on the silver dollar these days. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they once considered putting her picture on the $20 bill, in place of Jackson, but that never worked out. But they worked to try to get the right to vote for women. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, you don't hear much about it more, but it still exists. The WCTU, or Women's Christian Temperance Union, is founded to encourage people to not drink anything at all, any alcohol at all, any fermented beverages. And these groups would march, sing hymns, and try to get saloon owners to promise not to sell alcohol. Occasionally they would get one, but it did not last. Again, folk, the idea of not drinking alcohol was pushed by a lot of factory owners and a lot of, like the railroads. For the railroads did not want persons under the influence to drive their trains. And factory owners did not want persons under the influence to operate the machinery. And I will say this, it is very, very much illegal to drive under the influence of alcohol. Now, I know a man at Lockheed who, this was several years ago, but he got caught driving under the influence. The judge said, if you do that again, we'll put you in jail for a time. He did it again, and he got 180 days, and he served every day of it. During that time, he lost his job at Lockheed because of excessive absences. So it hurt him worse. The union eventually got him back on, but he did not get his back pay. So for the 180 days he missed work, half a year. 180 days is half a year, 6 months. That was half a year's pay that he lost. So it did hurt him. Again, these presidents, there was Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland, and McKinley. You don't hear much about them because little was expected of them. They were told to leave business alone. Senators were allowed to accept money from anyone. Big corporation would buy them, and there was a saying that went around, we have the best senators money can buy. And that was largely true. Most of the senators were bought. Not only, did the big corporate buy their office, but once in office, the big corporation would tell a senator how to vote if he wanted to stay in office. And most senators would vote the way that their political bosses told them to. Their political bosses, meaning men like Rockefeller and Carnegie, Morgan, big business, the trust. Well, a lot of people didn't like this because they said, well, the senators are elected by state legislators. Let's get senators elected by common people. The right to make senators elected by the people. And eventually this was done. Strong Republican bosses controlled party politics. And the book talks about how the Roscoe Conkling led the Grant faction. By the way, Grant belonged to Conkling's faction of the Republican Party. They were corrupt. Conkling himself wanted to be president. The half-breeds were not as corrupt as the stalwarts, but they were still somewhat tainted. Then the mugwumps, they were the ones, the Republicans who tried to reform. They tried to keep themselves clean. Hayes was the middle of the road. He alienated all three branches of his party. When I was in high school, our history book said Hayes refused to be told what to do by his political bosses, and guess what? Look at his record, he was a 4-year president. He would not be told what to do by his political bosses. So knowing he had no chance to get the nomination of his party, much less win the election, he told everybody he would not run against. I believe a president should only serve one term. He used that as an excuse. Actually, the job proved pretty tough for him. He'd been a general in the Army, and being a general was not as hard as being president of the United States. So the Republicans chose James Garfield, and for vice president chose Chet Arthur. Garfield got elected. He found it difficult to pacify the factions, but also he worked to see to it that he did not give jobs to people who had helped him get elected. Well, a man named Guiteau shot him. For 3 months, Garfield lingered in great pain, hovering between life and death. Now, there was no 25th Amendment. Now, if this would happen today, the vice president would automatically take over until Garfield was well enough to resume his duties. As it was, Garfield never got well. And a lot of people believe that had Garfield been around today, today's doctors could pull him through, just like Lincoln's doctors could pull him through. McKinley, no, McKinley was too badly wounded and Kennedy had his brain shot out. So no doctor could have helped them, but Garfield, again, they didn't have x-rays, they didn't have anesthesia as such. If today's doctors could have pulled the bullet out of Garfield, just like the doctors pulled the bullet out of Reagan. But anyway, Garfield was shot by a man who wanted to an office and didn't get one. The man who shot him, now it's been noted that most assassins realize later that they shouldn't have done it. But we're told, I mean, he said, you know, hey, I've done what the people want me to, and Chet Arthur is president. No, the people did not want that done. The people were very outraged. Now today you don't hear much about Garfield's assassination, but in those days it made the news for months. When Garfield died, Chet Arthur became president. The Pendleton Civil Service Act was passed, and it made civil service jobs available on merit, and this act is still in service. A civil service employee could only be fired for incompetence or fired for corruption. He could not be fired for politics. In other words, that's why the director of the FBI was able to serve from one president to another. Civil service employees take a test, and this goes all the way back to the Chinese and the Japanese. They had civil service exams also. If you've served in the military, you get 5 points added to your score automatically. But the ones who get the highest scores in the test get the jobs. Pendleton Civil Service Act, 1884, and this eliminated the spoils system brought about by the assassination of Garfield. Well, Blaine became the leader of the Republican Party. Chet Arthur, a lot of persons said, my, Chet Arthur is president. But Arthur rose to the job. He was honest, and he insisted on honesty. Everybody thought that he would be a corrupt politician. He wasn't. But he did not, he refused to be told what to do by his political bosses. He only served for 4 years. Now later research showed he had a kidney disease that he knew was going to kill him. And his wife had died already. He never did remarry, again because he knew he was going to die soon himself. He survived his 4 years of presidency and died shortly after leaving office. All right. Folks, with that, I'm going to have to call it. I mean, I really want to elaborate more on this thing about Grover Cleveland. But anyway, Grover Cleveland was accused of fathering an illegitimate child, even though your book says he might not have been the father. But anyway, he became the president next, but we'll talk about that next time. Everybody have a good couple of days and hope